All right. This evening we're having tunics, dresses, and coats. Oh my, with Paula McLean, our instructor.
I love the way the text turned me into polymer clay. Hi, I'm Paula McClellan. Most people know me as Sam. And this class is just a really very basic approach to how to make a garment. It's aimed at people in a historical recreation group, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. What I'll do first is I'm going to talk some about the history and the different time frames that this particular garment would fit into. It is not historically accurate, but it's made in a way that's going to look good, but it's easy to make. I want to start with a little bit of where it comes from. If you were in a recreation group, this is fairly early history. Now, I play in a recreation group called the Society for Creative Anachronisms, and my particular interest is the early part of that historical time frame, especially like the Norse time frame. So if you look at some of the books that I have this wonderful book, Woven into the Earth. And if you look in that book, you will see garments that are going to look exactly like the garment you could create after you take these measurements and use this class. One of the other delightful books that works with that is this guy. Am I doing it so you don't get the reflections?
It looks perfect.
Oh, thank you. Now I'm going to bring up another picture because those are both obviously very, very Norse and Viking aimed, but I have another picture right here that is actually, while it's late in that period, it's very Norman. Can you see it now?
There you go. Perfect.
Yay. So if you look at the cut of her neckline, except for the fact that this has those really drapey sleeves, this is exactly the garment that you can create using these measurements. I'm going to get rid of Empress Kunigunda. The other picture I want to show you are actually pictures of the garments that I've made. So this is a picture of me in Ed's garment. Can you see it? Yes, no, maybe?
Yep, that looks great.
So that's a picture of me in Ed's garment. And so this is, no, that's not what I wanted to do. But I had a picture of Ed in Ed's garment. Basically, what I wanted to show you out of those two pictures is you can make this fit anybody with any shape. They can be skinny, skinny, skinny like a tetherball pole, or they can be, very voluptuous and very curvy, big in one part, not big in the other part. You can modify this to fit just about anybody. With that said, oh, thank you, Gita. I'm going to change over to my HD camera and I'm going to talk about how you would measure this. There's my wonderful son-in-law. Everybody say hi.
Hi.
So if you look at the handout, there's a person standing there with their arms out. And the first thing you're going to do is take the measurements from the back. Would you turn around, please, dear? So one of them talks about measuring the neck. And can you see where you can't because my head's in the way. See where my measure tape is? I'm going to measure from one side of the neck to the other. And on Brian, that's a 6. Then I'm going to find this bone right here on his neck. And that's the name of my handout, address from a neck bone. I'm going to take this neck bone. I'm going to measure down to his breast area. I'm going to measure down to his waist. And then I'm going to measure down to the biggest part of his bum. And you'll see on the handout that there's a place there for you to write that down. Will you turn around so I can see the front of you? Turn up again, please. Now I'm going to measure around him. I'm going to touch you. And whether it's a boy or girl, you want to measure across the nipples, and you want it to be loose enough that they're comfortable. Now, some of us don't want it to be real tight. So I can make it as tight as I want, or I can make it as loose as I want. So I'll usually ask the person, or I'll fit it on me and say, how does that feel? Do you like the way that moves? And then I'm going to mark that measurement down on that handout. I'm going to do the same around his waist. So you can see if somebody's got very voluptuous breasts, or a large belly, or a large bum, lots of hip, I can make it any size I need it to be. You turn around, please, again.
Yep.
And then to measure, I'm going to measure from that neck bone again to however long I want the garment to be. And I can make it go all the way to the floor if I need to. Am I talking too fast?
No, you're good.
You're good.
Now I'm going to measure his sleeve. You always want to crook the arm just a touch, because that way it gives you the length you're going to want in your sleeve when the arm is down and when the arm is up. I'm going to measure from this neck bone around the elbow to however long I want to make the sleeve. Whoops, there's my camera. And then I'm going to mark that one. You'll turn again so I can see this further. Now, especially on the big guys, that are the big fighter guys, if you'll put your arm up, please. I want to measure this bicep. And I want to make sure that there's enough room in that bicep that they can flex that arm and wear that. Now, if they're using it for a fighting tunic, I may not want to make it a little bit bigger in there so that they've got more room to flex that arm. And for those of us in a recreation group, that's important sometimes to the guys. And then I'm going to measure his wrist. Now, the way I'm going to do that, so I'm probably going to measure like right about here. And I'm going to say, pull your hand out. Can you put your hand in there? And then ask them, is that a reasonable length or a reasonable looseness for that wrist thing? Been a wonderful.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edward.
Isn't he sweet?
He is.
Especially because I don't know if you were here earlier, he marked where he was supposed to stand with amazingly wonderful duct tape. So let's see if I can pull up that handout. Wait, that's not what I want to do. I want to share screen. Haha, there it is. So if I scroll up to the top page of that handout, you'll see here is the words for those measurements I just took. So if on Brian, from the back of the side to the side of the neck was 6 inches. You'll notice then that for the circumference of the chest, the waist, and the hip, I'm going to divide it by 4. That's going to make sense in a minute. I'm going to think about the length of my garment, and all of this, besides the comfort of how light, tight, or how loose the garment fits, you want to think about seam allowance. Now, I've spent a lot of time quilting, so I usually only do 1/4 of an inch of seam allowance. Some people do 5/8, some people do half, but you need to think about adding that as well. There's the length of my sleeve. And remember, it just depends upon how long you want that sleeve to be. It can be short or it can be long. Then we talked about the armpit and the wrist. Then here's that length from the neck bone to the chest, mid bra line. And I usually use, to be real honest, the nipples as my landmark. The length from the neck bone to the waist, and the length from the neck bone to the hips. So over here on the right-hand side are places for you to write all of those measurements. And then I have to give artistic credit to Deborah, she did these wonderful, wonderful things for me. Deborah Simon, she's amazing because I can't draw a stick figure. And so you can see the numbers on my figure match the numbers over here on my list. You with me so far? I've taken a non-sewing guy with fighter brain and taught him how to make a coat. If you keep scrolling down, it talks about how to lay out your fabric. So you're going to fold the fabric over in half, first width, and then in length. And you can see in that picture there, there's my folds and there's my other folds. Now, you'll see my little drawings here match the numbers back up there on number 1. So for example, number 1 is going to be this guy right here. So what I'm going to do, and I happen to mark a dress for myself, that's how I would mark number 1. I'd go down about 1 inch, and here's my 6 inches cut in half, which would be 3 inches. I'm going to bring that back up again. Number 2 here is my chest circumference. And remember, we divided that by 4. And that's because it's going to look like, I don't know if I can show you well, this part right here. Can you see where my pin is? So if I go back to that handout, and you see this laid out there on the fabric, what you're going to do is you're going to take those measurements and you're going to mark it with pins on your fabric. So when you go to cut it, you're going to use those pins as your guidelines, as your guide markers. So I'll know how far to cut in before I start to cut down and start to cut out for my chest, my waist, and my hips, all the way down to however long I want it to be. If I go down to the next part in the handout, it talks about how to finish the opening. And there's 2 ways to do it. One of them is to use a keyhole cut. So I did some examples. And a keyhole cut is pretty darn easy. So here's my facing. And here's my fabric. And we'll talk about right and wrong sides in a minute. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew around the edge of that neck opening. But right here in the front, I'm going to have marked how far down I want it to cut. And then I'm going to stitch down that line. So let me show you what that line looks like. On this one, you see, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make you car sick. I drew a line. There he is. And so what I'm going to do when I stitch this is I'm going to use that line as my guide, and I'll stitch my seam allowance away all the way around that cut, that keyhole cut. So then when I'm all done, I'm going to cut down that line. And that's going to be my neck opening. When I turn this right side out, I'm going to stick my finger in the little pointies and turn the pointies out. And then I'm going to fold that facing so that I have a finished edge sticking out. So I may need to tuck that in. I'm probably going to stitch around it on the top again to top stitch that down in. But now I have a nice finished keyhole edge. And the guys like this a lot. Now, some of the downfalls for the keyhole edge, if you're not careful, you want to measure Feel that notch in your throat? You want to measure from that notch in your throat to however far down you want the opening to go. If you make it too small, you can always make it bigger. So think about that part, maybe make it on the smaller side. However, if you make it huge, you can find a pretty brooch or a lovely pin and pin it closed. Either one of those are a good way to solve that problem. Are there any questions up to this point? I'm not good at reading the chat thing, but
We don't have any questions in chat. We do have one comment. I can't pronounce her name. I'm so sorry. She just had a comment about measurements and making sure you account for muscle growth. Lady fighters, especially, she had to remake a kirtle sleeve because she didn't account for her muscle growth.
correct. I learned that one the hard way because I made a tunic for a fighter in my household and he could get his arms in, but he looked like that kid in Christmas Story because he couldn't bend his arms because the sleeves were too tight. It was very funny at the moment.
My name is Saif, and yeah, we had made the kirtle. I had some help. We'd made it all nicely fitted and well supportive, shall we say.
Yes.
And then I really threw myself into my Pell work and my fighting, and I was having fun. And then I went to go put it on and couldn't put the sleeve on.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah. So I learned that one the hard way. Now so that's a perfect segue into it doesn't fit. I made it too small. First off, making things too small is harder to fix than if you make it too big. I'm going to bring up the handout again. Try not to make you car sick. We'll come back and talk about the necks in a minute. But at the bottom of this, it talks about what to do if you need to make it different. So here at the bottom one, mistakes happen. So if it's too small, say in the sleeve part, I don't know if you can see, but the top of that garment there, it's got a line. What I did was I cut it right at the top of the sleeve here, and I added a strip of fabric. Looked like it belonged there, put a strip down the back. It was beautiful. Everybody thought it was supposed to be there. Nobody knew it was a mistake. Another way to fix that, if it's too big, or excuse me, too small on the sides, there's several ways to do it. You can put a strip in the front and make it bigger. You can put a strip in front and back, or you can open it up and you can put a gore all the way up to the armpit. And that's going to open that chest area a lot. So I want to close this. I want to talk a little bit about that keyhole neckline and the different ways you would want to think about doing it. So this one, I sewed in such a way, I lied to you. This one I sewed in such a way that it folded inside. So that means my facing is on the inside of my garment. And I would top stitch very carefully right next to the edge of my neck opening. However, if I plan it correctly, when I stitch it and I cut it open, give me a minute, I have to cut this one open. I can bring my facing to the outside. So if this part's my garment and this part's my facing, I can bring my facing to the outside of my fabric or the outside of my garment, so that when it folds over, I have a contrasting bit that I can tuck up. And now I have my very own finished trim, if you will, around the edge of my garment, my neckline. The scoop neckline's way, way, way easier. I'm going to open up the handout again. The scoop neckline. My first pin is going to go at my mark to measure the neck opening. For example, Brian's neck was 6, so it's going to be 3 inches from the pin to the fold of my fabric. And then I'm going to cut that part right there. So then I'm going to pin this part just a bit. And if you see this one, I'm going to reach up inside and I'm going to take that inside part and I'm going to fold it back so I don't accidentally cut it. And then I'm going to cut my front part even deeper to however deep I want it to be. Now, some ladies want it a little bit more cleavage than others, just depends. It also depends upon if you're looking to do a particular time frame or what use you want the garment to have, right? If it's just your basic, I'm going to wear this around the campfire dress, that might be different than I'm going to wear this in a fancy setting dress. Now with this one, the way you're going to finish it is you're going to double fold that edge under. So if this is my neck edge, I'm going to take the edge, I'm going to fold it once, and then I'm going to fold it again, because what that's going to do is that's going to hide that unfinished edge inside my hem. There's many ways to finish that. You can stitch it in the same color and top stitch it. Depending upon what you're planning on doing with that garment, and if you're using it in a recreation setting, you can do decorative stitches around it. For example, if you're looking to do a Norse type thing, you could think of a blanket stitch or any of the wonderful stitches you learned from Mistress Algitha. So there's a lot of different ways you can approach this. Any questions so far about necklines? Once you've made that first garment, I guarantee you're going to make the neckline too big. Yeah, my first one, you could I had to end up stitching it closed at the shoulders because you could put 3 or 4 people in it. It was quite huge. I'm going to open the handout back up again. The next part I want to talk about, if you scroll down a little bit, is I want to talk about how you're going to finish that. So there's my keyhole neck. There would be my scoop neck. Let's talk about gussets and gores. A gusset is something you're going to put in an area like an armpit or a crotch. In this dress or tunic, it's going to go in the armpit area, and it just gives you more leeway and a different kind of play in the fabric as you move. Now, if you don't want to mess with gores, that's fine. What you'll do, I'm going to scroll back up here, is when I go to cut out that arm, I'm just going to cut it in a scoop. And I'm going to give myself more room in there. It's going to be a little bit bulkier, if you will, a little bit bigger looking in the armpit area. But sometimes at your very beginning, especially if this is, or you're making this for a child who's going to outgrow it in 6 months, yeah, you're just going to cut that little scoop and life is good. If you want to put the gore in, instead of this scoop look, you're going to cut it in a straight line, down and then down. So you have almost a 90-degree angle there at the joint of that armpit and that chest line. So if I scroll back down a little bit, sorry, I'm not trying to make you car sick. and I get down to this gusset, here's a picture of how it's going to go. So I'm going to cut my arms from my sleeve to my chest area in closer to a 90-degree angle. And then I'm going to make the gusset out of that scrap that I cut out of there. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to cut it first into a square. And then I'm going to trim that square into closer to a diamond shape. So I'm going to close the handout and show you my cutouts. So this first one here is just a scoop sleeve. Here's where my arm part's going to go. And I just cut it in a scoop and it's going to go down. This is my garment. So it's very easy. And when you go to stitch it, you just stitch along that line. It's very, very, very simple to put together. When you're feeling a little bit skippier, you're going to cut and do a gusset. So again, here's my cut. See, it's more of a 90-degree angle. And this is the piece I took out. So I'm going to fold that piece to make a square. And to be real honest, this is not an exact science. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this into a diamond shape by cutting it here and making it taper to that point. Go away. Likewise on the other side, cut it here and make it taper to that point. So that when I open it up, I have that cute little diamond shape. Now this one's a little bit trickier. When I get ready to put that on, I'm going to pin it right sides together. And I'm going to pin it so that I have some overlap for my 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now, if you're using 1/2-inch seam allowance, you want a 1/2-inch overlap. I'm going to put that first pin in right at that 90-degree angle so I know when to stop stitching. So now if you can see on this side, my pin is right there at my 90-degree angle. And on this side, my pin shows me where to stop stitching. Well, maybe it does. It's not a very good shot. My pin is right here. Doesn't show up well, sorry. So I'm going to stitch from the edge of this gusset to there, to that pin. Now, when I get that pin in there and I'm done, I'm going to snip my threads, and this is what it's going to look like. But then to go to the next side, I'm going to bend it kind of like at a 45-degree angle. And I'm going to pin the other part, starting there where I want to start stitching and pinning it to the end of my gusset. I know your mom probably told you never put your pins in your mouth, right? I just broke all the rules. So when I go back to the machine and I stitch that, I'm going to stitch 1/2 of my diamond. When I put my sleeves together, I'm going to stitch the second half of my diamond. I have a finished one that I want to show you. So if you look at this dress, can you see the gusset there? And that is right at that 90-degree angle part of my sleeve and my armpit. So what it does is it gives you room to move that without that. Sometimes the arch, the curve is really bulky, and this is just a little bit more refined, a little bit finer look and silhouette to the garment. But it still gives you lots and lots and lots of room to move those things, which is great if you're making this for somebody who's really active, like a child, somebody who's going to be running, playing, skipping, somebody who's going to be dancing. That could be just about anybody, right? The other thing I want to show you on this garment is you can see how I turned under my scooped neckline. And all it is I turned it under. You can see this is the wrong side of the fabric, obviously. Sometimes those scoops take a little bit more to pin down than you're used to. So take your time with it. You can always, always, always stitch that by hand because it's easier by hand to work things out. Because sometimes I know it sounds harder, but sometimes, especially when you're going around that curve, it's harder on the machine than it is to do it by hand. Don't expect the very first one to look like it came from Chanel, okay? Take your time. It's going to be fine. And you know what? Everyone's going to say, that's beautiful. And if they don't, you give my name, you give me their name, and I will tell them. I told my children, they would say, thank you. My mommy just made this for me. Because nobody has the right to tell you anything about it. I know. There are some out there who just really like to pick on people, but nobody has the right to do that. The next thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to open up the handout again, and I'm going to try not to spill water all over my brand new computer. I want to talk about gores. Now, gores are things you're going to put in the side. So there's the gusset, and above that talks about gores. Now, a gore, you can see right here, a gore goes into the seam of that garment. To be real honest, with your first couple of garments, you're going to want to split it on all four sides. So if I scroll up a little bit, when I get ready to cut this out, I'm going to cut along the sleeve, along the arm, down the chest, the waist, and the hip, but I'm also going to cut it. Can you see my mouse? Gita, can you see my mouse?
Yes, yes.
Oh, beautiful. So I'm also going to cut front and back here. So I essentially end up with 4 pieces of a dress or a tunic that I'm going to sew together. The reason I cut it here in the front, for dresses especially, is because now I can put a gore in there and it gives me a more flowier, more comfortable, more movement in my garment. So if I scroll down a little bit farther now, here's where I'm going to talk about my gores. Now, when you lay that garment out on your fabric, you're going to have extra fabric underneath the arm, and you can taper that down as you get down, and it starts to fill out as the garment goes out towards the bottom of the garment. So I can put these in as upside down triangles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend this is one side of my triangle, and I'm going to sew it into the seam, and I'm probably going to start at the bottom of the garment. So I would, sorry, I'm not trying to go too fast. I'm going to come here to this side, and I'm going to lay the edge of that gore there, and I'm going to pin it, and then I'm going to stitch it. And then I'm going to pin the other side of that garment to that gore, and then I'm going to continue to stitch up to the armpit. The reason you want to split it here in front and back, to do that if you're putting gores in the front and the back, is it makes it lay much smoother. When you look at the extant garments, most of them just have a cut here for that gore to go in, but it's really tough to get that to lay flat up there. Otherwise, it looks like a funny belly button. So the first couple of times you want to make one with gores in the front and the back, you do want to split it down this garment so that you have that full seam to sew that gore into. Now, a lot of guys don't want to gore in front. Let me rephrase that. A lot of people who want to use this as a tunic don't want that gore in front, because I guess it's not all guys that want tunics. So depending upon what that person wants or what you want, if you don't put a gore in front, that's okay too. I've sometimes done garments where I just put gores on the side. It gives you that flow and that swing when somebody's walking. It gives you room when they walk to take a nice big stride, because that's the other consideration you have to think of. So if I scroll back up, trying to not make you car sick again. And I come down here, this edge, if I come down very, very straight, I only have so much circumference once it's sewn together. So if I put that gore in, or I flare out, now flaring out, we're going to talk about in a minute. But if I put that gore in, then I have more movement and I can take a bigger stride or do other things in it, dance, that sort of thing. If you do this scoopy here, be careful you don't scoopy too far, because sometimes when you do that, this is going to hang weird once it's on, especially in a tunic, depending upon how that person's hips are made. This hangs really funny, and it looks like you've got floppy, droopy dog ears hanging off of your garment. They're not always very becoming. Are there any questions for me so far?
I didn't have any questions, Sam, but I did have a comment when you were talking about the part of where it has that droopy thing on the side sometimes.
Yes.
What I found in a couple of, after I made my first few tunics, was to kind of cut that edge up, go up on the side just a little bit to cut that little corner off, and then it doesn't have that weird droopy.
Right here?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of curve it up just a little bit, and then it hangs straighter. Yeah.
One of the ways to completely get rid of that is to stick in a gore, because then you have a bare circle up at the bottom.
Yes, yeah.
Am I scrolling too fast, Gita? Am I making people car sick?
It's not bothering me.
Okay.
So
I'm trying to remember that it looks different on your guys' side than it does on mine. Remember, once again, you want to think about seam allowances. So if you're going to add gores, especially in front and in back, you need to make the garment just a little bit bigger then, because you're going to take up that seam allowance and you're going to lose that space. So for example, if I'm using 1/4 inch seam allowance, I take up 1 inch of fabric between the front and the back alone, because that's 1/2 inch of each one. And so that's a total inch that I would lose in the circumference of my garment. So I really, really, really want to think about that. However, remember, it's usually okay, and you can make garments bigger. It's obviously easier to make them smaller than it is to make them bigger. This is going way faster than I thought I would. Am I not? I hope I'm not talking too fast, but I'm keeping up with the, oh, what do I want to call it? Closed captioning. The last one I want to talk about down here is how to turn this into a coat. It's basically the same thing, but I'm going to leave the front open when I'm all done. Instead of stitching it closed like I would for a tunic or a dress, I'm going to leave it open. Now, lining this, you just basically end up making 2 garments, and you stitch them together with their right sides together. So you would fold the lining inside, and then you're going to stitch around these edges right here and top stitch it down. You can add all kinds of embellishments there. You can hold it closed with a cloak clasp. Say that 3 times fast. With frogs, with just about anything you want, or you can just lap it over in front and tie it closed with a belt. I have had really good success lining these with fleece. Now, fleece It's not going to be a historically accurate fabric. I get that part, but it sure is nice and toasty late at night. The other thing I discovered is the fleece lining that I put inside of it. I usually make it shorter than I made my outside garment, and that tends to work out better. And I've hidden pockets in there. So you have a pocket right inside the front part of your coat. It's quite delightful. You can hide a lot of things in those pockets. Oh, and there's Deborah Kirkwood, Deborah Simon, my artist. Well, that wasn't bad. Now let's talk a little bit about how I can embellish this. I'm going to turn the dress that you've seen right side out, and then I'm going to share it with you.
Sam, I had a question about the coat before you move
Yes,
on
ma'am.
a little bit. When you sew your lining in, you don't sew the lining to the coat along the bottom, though, do you? You just leave that loose?
Correct. I usually leave the bottom open and loose.
Okay.
Another thing, while it's fun to make it floor length, if you are walking in a camping environment, all the way to the ground doesn't always work out really well. So you might want to think about making the coat a little bit shorter than you would make a dress if you were going all the way to the ground, just because it's going to not drag in foliage or mud or bushes in a camping environment.
Yeah, yes, good idea.
I'm going to stop sharing. This start and stop then's kind of fun. So with this particular dress, I made for an historical event. And I decided I want it to be in the colors of my group. So I made the sleeves have 2 colors. And I hid my seam for the 2 colors with that pretty trim. And then I got really fancy and I sewed glass pearls on there. Believe me, those are not the real thing. I did that likewise around the bottom. But you can also do it down the sides. For example, if I'm wearing the dress this way, I can put embellishment down this way. I can put embellishment down this way. And that has a world of ways that you can finish it off. Let's say that you wanted to do something that was from, say, like the Byzantine type era. You could put a pretty piece of trim down there and sew all kinds of beads and pearly things on it. Did I make Kunigunda go all the way away? Hang on a minute. You can see on Kunigunda's dress here, the curvy part around the neckline. You could do that. You see that she's got trim on her skirt. She has trim on several places on her sleeve. She's got it right here above the elbow. She's got it on a long drapey bit. So you could make this as fancy or as plain as you want it to be. That went way faster than I thought it was going to go.
You're doing well. It's 10 minutes out roughly from your scheduled end time,
Woo!
but we can stay as long as you've got information.
The thing that I want to talk about is just more of that, where it fits historically. It would even fit into the time of the Normans, the Norman conquest after 1066, way up until even some of the simple dresses in the earlier period of French fashion. It can work a lot of ways. You can't necessarily fashion this one to provide support like you can with a kirtle. Oh, that would be one thing to mention. If you are making this for a person who wears brassieres, they want to be wearing one when you measure them. Otherwise, your final product could look funny. I learned that one the hard way. And some of us wear different undergarments at events than we do in day-to-day life. So you would want to think about that. If you're going to wear this for a specific event, what sort of undergarments are you going to wear with it so that everything fits well and you're comfortable with it. The coat part, I have had a blast with the coat part. I had a picture that I just cannot seem to find where I made a friend of mine and I matching coats. And they were just so much fun. And we did this whirling dervish thing at the campfire that nobody fell into the campfire, by the way. And you can put, if you decided that you wanted to put gores in all of it, you can do seam treatments on all of those gores. And that can be as simple as you put a piece of trim down that seam, or it could be as fancy as you want to do blanket stitching or some of the Norse embroidery stitches that Mr. Salgetha talks about. Any of those. There's just so many ways this can go. For a Norman type, you can use it as the underdress and the overdress. Because you'll notice in that picture of Kunigunda, she was wearing an overdress as well as an underdress. You would just make your overdress a little bit bigger so it fits nicely, but still fits you the way you want it to fit. I've run out of things to say. Anybody have a question for me? Comment, snide remarks, or stupid jokes?
Well, when you were talking about the coats, I was definitely hoping that you would mention the coats that you made for you and Evelyn, because I see those every time when we go to events, camping events, and they always make me smile.
He sent me a picture and I can't seem to find it. I'm not,
Oh,
I know, it's somewhere in my phone.
yeah.
Somewhere in my phone.
You'll come across it some other time when you didn't intend to. 'Cause,
Oh, I'll probably find it in 10 minutes from now. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Something that I have been told very, like, especially lately, I've been trying to create a sideless surcoat. Oop, hold on. Where'd it
Oh,
go?
your background is interfering.
is.
There you go.
There we go.
So this pattern is not going to adapt well to be a sideless surcoat. Let me think about it. I would have to work at it to turn it into one. You could ultimately, because basically all it is once you've got those measurements, you cut it into fourths and you lay it on a piece of fabric and cut it out like you would geometry pieces.
Okay. Looking at my background, and I can turn my background off. I just have to be careful what I have behind me. There we go. Okay, so this is one of the patterns that I have been kind of playing with that I saw.
Yes.
And with the sideless surcoat, of course, all of this here is open. And this,
Right.
of course, would break down onto my hip. And the problem I have is, now I keep getting told, well, no. The side stuff, you just do a half circle for it and it'll be fine. Except that my fabric doesn't do half circles because my fabric I've got a limited amount of fabric.
Yeah.
So I'm having to piece it. And the one thing that I have to remember always is, where is the gravity going to pull it?
Correct.
Because as much as my gores, I mean, I could have lined it up with the edge, but then there's that whole bias where it pulls.
Right. And I see where you're going with that one.
So with gores, especially, you have to kind of watch that you're not just cutting it in whatever direction you want, because these points, that is the drape pull down, and if you put it on a bias or into the angle, it's now going to do this weird stretchy thing.
And that's going to be the dilemma you're going to struggle with the sideless surcoat. So historically, sideless surcoats were to prove that you had money because you had enough money to buy all that fabric. Yeah. Do they fit well for those of us on a Walmart budget? Not necessarily. The other thing to think about, I would have to say, would be fiber content. Your linen is gonna stretch more than, say, a duck. Do you know what I mean by a duck? By that cotton duck. Now, cotton duck may or may not be the look you're going for. So then you have to figure out where you're going to go with that. I have seen certain.
I was gifted silk.
Oh, but that's gonna fall funny.
I was gifted a beautiful thicker woven silk, and then a thin satiny silk that I could use as a lining.
Like a dupioni?
I'm not familiar with the term.
Does a silk look like it has little bumpy parts in it where maybe the weaving wasn't completely even?
Neither. One is a satiny, like almost like a satin, but it's definitely silk. And then the other, it almost looks like it's a twill.
So the other could be more of a raw silk, or it's been plied differently. I have some red stuff in my closet that looks like that. Yeah, you're gonna need somebody better at later period than me. I'm sorry, honey.
No,
I'm sorry for those of you who don't play in the SCA.
I was just thinking of just mentioning, because this is something that's been lately been told to me, is the idea of watching where the drape, where it's going to pull down,
Where's it going to pull?
Going to hold it, and if you cut it on an angle and then try and make that hang down, it's now going to like really stretch and pull. Versus,
I think that's why when you cut the edges, if you make that big swoop, you end up with the droopy dog ears. Go away, kitty. Kitties are playing with things they shouldn't play with, because then we'll need a vet later on.
Oops.
Well, of course.
Yeah. But there's fabric, so we have to eat the string.
Yeah.
Yes, I wasn't careful when I first started sewing in. I have a new sewing room, and I wasn't keeping the door shut. And then the kitty cats would come in and play, and then we would find fascinating treasures in the kitty box.
Oh, that's not good.
Yes, we had to start keeping the door closed before it became a veterinarian issue.
One tip that I was told when dealing with your bias cuts and that tendency to stretch is hang the garment up. Do your construction, hang it up a couple of days, a week. That's going to let the fabric stretch. And then do your hem. Don't do your hem until you've given it a chance to stretch. I've made this mistake a lot. And it's no fun to unpick a hem and fix things and go back. But on the bright side, my brother adores the droopy dog ears on his tunics and won't let me fix them.
I sewed for a gentleman that I was consort for a while, and he would tie knots in the droopy dog ears. He loved them. Tearlock. I would make tearlock droopy dog ears on purpose.
I could fully see him doing that.
Yeah. He would tie knots in them. So.
And as you know, a lot of my sewing adventures are with Alexandra.
Yes.
And so, she's very particular about, we do hang all the garments when we make, even if we're making, 5 or 6 at a time, we hang them overnight at least and spray them and let them do the thing before we cut and sew the hem. Definitely. But I was going to say, Savi, the instructor that did the Kirtle class, I know that she might be, because she does a little bit more late period, she might be able to help you with the silk issue. But I agree with Sam. I think it's probably raw silk, and that definitely does have a different hang than Dupioni silk.
For the people who aren't in the historical recreation group that a lot of us play in, we talk about the time frame as being within period. And so because I like the Viking and the Norse and the early, very early, 1066 and before, that would be considered early period. And if you liked the houplans or the other type of garments, that would be considered later period. And so that's what we're referring to by early period and late period.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have specified.
Okay.
Between 600 and 1600 is the time frame that we're usually going with.
When I first started playing with this recreation group, I wore the later period because, well, let's face it, the ladies look really nice in some of those leather corsets. Then as I got older, I realized, you know what, this is a lot of work. And now I really like the Norse clothing because it's very comfortable. Very comfortable.
It's very much easier to work in, and we
Yes.
to do a lot of that at events, so it does make it a lot easier.
Does anybody else have any questions for me? It's lovely to see some of you. I've seen you in other classes. I will leave you with a stupid joke. I love stupid jokes. My poor students have to listen to them all week long. Why is it good to sit in your living room and watch a fish tank? Because of all the endorphins. I know, that's awful.
Oh, I love them though. I love all your puns and jokes. Well, thank you for sharing. I really enjoy this. I always like to take your classes because there's always some little extra thing that I can pick up.
It was lovely to see all of you again. Lisa, where'd you go? There you are. I see you. Okay.
I'm still here.
I'm not good at this. Hello, Georgia. Frida. And yeah, I've seen you guys in classes before. Hello. Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, Pamela. Hi, anybody else who I can't see because I'm not good at this yet.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you, everyone, for coming. You don't have to leave. I just figure it's easier to chat without the cameras recording us.